You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terence Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mock,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Marianne Cronin on the show with me. She has an amazing new book. It's called The 100 Years of Lenni and Margot, and I can't even think of adjectives to describe this book. But if you only read one book this year, make sure this is sitting by your bedside or your favorite reading chair. This is one of those books that will stay with you and linger long after you close that back cover. Welcome to the show, Marianne.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Marianne, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
That's such a great question. I listened to the Vari McFarlane episode yesterday, so I'm prepped. My first memory is I was in year one, which is when you're about 5 or 6 years old, and our teacher at school had asked us to write a story. And I was writing this story about a rabbit, and I'm sure it was a huge rip-off of Beatrix Potter's Tales of Peter Rabbit. And it was all about this little rabbit who lived in a warren, and he went to the city and he didn't like it. And the teacher had to stop me from writing to tell me that it was time for break, like to go outside and play. And I just remember thinking, I don't want to stop, I want to keep going. And I think from then on, I have been just scribbling and writing ideas and stories down at an insane pace.
I love that so much. So you were, I think it's safe to say you were a fairly bookish kid. Were you one of those kids that walked around with their nose in a book?
Oh, absolutely. And I loved reading, but I also loved TV, which I think is something that authors don't talk about as much. But I always found that such a great sort of like diving into your imagination and, a really rich place for inspiration. So, yeah, I was always reading a book or watching TV or writing. I had a whole host of notebooks that my mum's kept that I've looked through recently, and they're just full of insane scribbles. But it meant a lot to me at the time, I'm sure.
That experience that you had where the teacher had to interrupt you to go outside, do you remember any other experiences you had where an adult maybe recognized this storytelling gene that you had and encouraged that?
Yeah, absolutely. A few years later, when I was about 8, 9 years old, my family had gone on holiday to a little house in France. And it was this really old house full of dark wood. And there was a locked door in this house that we weren't allowed to go into. And so when we returned for school in September, we were asked to write a story. And I wrote this story about this ghost that lived behind the door. And it was 6 or 7 pages of my exercise book. And I think other kids were maybe writing 1 or 2 sides and kind of like looking forward to the end of the task. And I just couldn't stop. And the teacher, she read it. She gave me some house points, which sounds very Harry Potter. But she gave me some house points, and she sat down and she read it to the class. And I was really embarrassed, but I was so thrilled. And I just remember being like blushing, but being so excited that she'd seen something in my writing. And I sort of still credit her with giving me that confidence to be like, people are going to sit and listen to these things that you're writing one day, which I think is really lovely.
Absolutely. The 100 Years of Linea and Margot is a book that just completely transports you as a reader, and you get so involved in these characters' lives that you kind of can forget that the world that the rest of us live in exists for a little while. Do you remember the first book, or maybe it was a series of books or an author that you experienced as a youngster that communicated to you that books could transport you to another place, that you could get involved in these people that don't exist in their lives, and that stories could become bigger than real?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Yeah, so I was a huge fan of Jacqueline Wilson, and she's a huge writer over here. I'm not sure if she's as popular in the US as she is in the UK, but she has written so many books, and one of her books is called The Lottie Project, and it's about a young girl who is doing a school project on the Victorians, and she falls into this kind of dream world where she's a Victorian and she writes these kind of diaries. And as a kid, I was really into history, and I just remember being so absorbed into this book and completely obsessed with it. And I just remember that feeling of like, I was sitting here looking at this page, but in my mind, I was somewhere completely different. And I'm pretty sure my mum had to like tear that from my hand to get me to go to sleep.
I love that. Marianne, you have a PhD in applied linguistics. What is applied linguistics?
It's so much more boring than fiction. Yeah, so it's basically so theoretical linguistics would be making up theories about language. So, for example, really old gender theories might be that women use words like fantastic or great more than men, whereas applied linguistics is taking those theories and applying them to sets of data and sort of, recording people, analysing data and seeing whether those theories hold up in the actual real world. So my PhD, which I was doing at the same time as writing the book, was a lot more fun than that. And my PhD looked at why we find impoliteness funny. So specifically, I was looking at impoliteness in sitcoms. So why do we find it funny when Ross screams at Rachel, "We were on a break"? Why do we giggle when people scream at each other and say offensive things in a sitcom? So that was what I was researching for my PhD.
So what was it about linguistics that captured your imagination? Like, what is it about language that you love so much?
Oh, I think it's just so fascinating. And I did my undergraduate degree and I cried on the last day of my lectures because I didn't want it to end. And all my friends were like, yes, it's over, we did it. And I was just heartbroken. And that was my first kind of inkling that maybe I should keep going with academia for a little bit longer. So I started doing my master's degree and absolutely fell in love with applied linguistics. And then my PhD, I just happened to meet this incredible supervisor and she really pushed me. She said, you can do this for a PhD, you have to start applying for research funding and all those kinds of things. And so it just drew me in. And I'm just fascinated with the way people communicate and how language makes us respond, which I think obviously makes a lot of sense being a writer now.
Sure. I think of J.R.R. Tolkien, who was a philologist and who created languages, and he kind of famously created the languages of Middle Earth, and then the stories that came out of that. What's the difference in a philologist and a linguist?
Ooh, that's a very technical question. I don't know. I think for linguistics, it's more about the analysis side of things. Linguistics sort of branches off into lots of subsections. So you have metaphor analysis, which is something that I was really into, political linguistics, gender and language, child acquisition. So it really does split and get very kind of specific into the subfield that you're interested in. But primarily it's about understanding language and use. So we have all these ideas about how we use language, but how do we really use language? Like what happens if we record people and they forget they're being recorded? What happens to their language? How do children communicate? How do they learn slang? All those kinds of things that just I could bore you with for hours.
Well, on the surface, they may not feel connected, the study and writing fiction. Yet, to hear you talk about language and linguistics, it almost feels like it's an extension of a fiction writing, or maybe fiction writing is an extension of the studies of linguistics. It's all about how we communicate. At what point did these two things sort of tie together in your mind? At what point did you realize, this is like this is storytelling in a sense. This is the study of storytelling in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there's so many things that sort of spring to mind with that question. I think one of them was I started studying stylistics, which is a branch of linguistics, and it looks at how language in fiction creates effects in the reader. And in this textbook, the researcher had said that characters or speakers who are more powerful tend to do a few things all the time. So they will interrupt others, they will speak for the longest time, and they will control the topic of conversation. And so when you apply that to language in literature, when you have an overbearing character, when you analyse their language, usually that's what they're doing. And so for me, that felt like that just switched a light on. And my writing of dialogue has forever been shaped by that. So when I was writing Lenni and Margot, Lenni is seriously ill. She has a terminal illness, but she doesn't like to talk about it. And so I had so much fun with her interacting with the priest, the hospital chaplain, Father Arthur, because she doesn't ever really want to answer the question. And so all the ways that she kind of sneaks about topics all came originally from that study of stylistics.
Wow. As writers, we hear the piece of advice that's bandied about all the time. Show, don't tell, and that's really what you're talking about, isn't it? It's how we communicate, in without how the words create pictures, if you want to say it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the little tricks that writers have that create these outcomes. And, when you're first starting out as a creative writer, you think, how did they do this? And sometimes things like show, don't tell can be really useful, but other times you want to get very specific. That might just be me, my analyst's brain. But things like knowing that you're controlling the topic means that you're a powerful speaker really helped me to kind of access certain ways of having characters speak and interrupt each other and so on. And I think it is, as you say, rather than saying this character doesn't want to talk about things, showing it through that dialogue and having that character evade the subject as often as she can.
Sure.
What Death Taught Terence by Derek McFadden. Life is a journey. So is the afterlife. At the end of his life, Terence MacDonald must discover its meaning, or he'll be banned from the afterlife forever, and his soul will cease to exist. Join Terence and those who love him on a poignant and unforgettable journey through a life at once wonderful and harrowing. Learn what Terence learned. See what Terence sees. By this provocative story's end, readers may even learn a thing or two about themselves. See why people are saying things like, Derek McFadden writes with an insight few can match. If you like the works of Mitch Albom, I think you'll find What Death Taught Terence a worthy addition to your library, and the reading of it a life-affirming journey. I found the story immediately immersive, and it stuck with me long after I finished. What Death Taught Terence by Derek McFadden, on sale now. Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website, developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web.
So you said that you started writing the 100 Years of Lenni and Margot while you were doing your PhD thesis. That those are like, are you a glutton for punishment or
Yeah, I think when I look back now, the book took 7 years from the first draft to the final draft, and I can completely see why, because there would be some days I'd be in my office doing my PhD, on Word, writing, and then I'd come home, have dinner, sit down, open Word, and be like, right, Lenni and Margot, and my brain would just be like, nope, 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 and like, we need to put some Netflix on, we need to just kind of decompress a little bit. So for me, it really was, the reason it took me so long was because of that, trying to balance those kind of two, the analytical and the creative sort of demands. But I did find that Lenni and Margot was actually something I would look forward to at the end of the day, because it was so much more fun than my PhD. Yeah, I really enjoyed sort of having that in the evenings or at the weekends as like a little treat, I suppose.
So I'm fascinated with the beginnings of things, where stories are created, and that it's sort of a trite question to ask a writer, where do your ideas come from? But kind of deeper than that, stories are just plain magic sometimes. That one moment Lenni and Margot don't exist in any form whatsoever. And then either a character walks onto the stage of your mind, or you're sort of daydreaming and you start playing the what if game in your mind, where, what if this, plot device sort of worked its way out to its natural conclusion? What would happen there? And then characters populate that plot. And then all of a sudden, the 100 Years of Linea and Margot exist in some form in your mind. And then, then it's the process of you excavating that story, if you want to look at it that way. But how did these characters come to you? How did this story of these two people, come to inhabit your mind?
Yeah, I think there were quite a few things that happened simultaneously. And when I look back now, I'm like, oh, that's where that came from. So sort of as I started talking about the book more with people, I've realized, oh, that was where that came from. So when I started writing, I was 22, and I'd gone to the doctor's just for a normal appointment. I thought I had a throat infection, and I said to her, oh, my chest feels like a little bit fluttery. And so she did a heart test, and she said that my pulse was 190 beats per minute. And wow. She said to me, the options are you drive yourself to A&E or to hospital, or I call an ambulance. I have to do one of these two things. And I was like, oh, I'm really hungry. I've just come from work. Can I have dinner first? She was like, I don't think you're appreciating how serious this is. No, you can't have dinner. So I drove myself off to hospital, and they, again, at that point, I think my heart was about 230 beats per minute, which is ridiculously high. But I was quite calm, and they were saying, oh, are you scared of hospitals and doctors? And I was like, no, I'm fine. And so that just led to lots of sort of outpatient appointments over the next few months and weeks, trying to figure out what was going on with my heart. And so because I was only 22, I suddenly felt very mortal. And I was really aware of like, oh my goodness, like the thing that's keeping me alive is in trouble. What's going to happen? And as I was waiting in the hospital, I started to think, what would it be like to know that you were going to die? And then a few weeks later, I was writing a master's essay on metaphor theory. And I got to thinking about the link between terminal as in terminal illness and terminal as in the airport. And I just started writing. And the first line of the book is the first thing I ever wrote. And the first page is the first thing I ever wrote. Like, it's barely changed from that moment. And it sounds really spooky to say, but it really felt like Lenni just popped into my head. It felt like she visited me and she had to tell me this story, which I feel like for people who are learning creative writing is such an unhelpful answer, in terms of like learning the craft. But it just felt like she was there, and I knew exactly how she would respond to people being kind to her, and I knew how she'd respond to indifference. And so I started writing these chapters with the hospital chaplain, Father Arthur, and that was my way of kind of feeling Lenni out. Where are her limits? What does she do? How does she push people's buttons? And so within the first few days, I had Lenni, and then the next task was Margot, who was quite a lot harder to create.
So where did this idea of two characters on different ends of the age spectrum, and together they have lived 100 years? How did you come up with that scenario to put these two characters in?
It was one of those things where I'd been chatting with a friend about combined ages, and we were like, oh, between us, we're, 50 years old or what have you. And so that I think had been in my mind. And then when I got Lenny's voice, I knew that she was young. And for a long time, I'd wanted to write something set in hospital art class after I'd seen a documentary about hospital art class. And it just kind of, I think I must have just had this all sort of percolating in the back of my mind. And the idea of adding Lenny's age to someone else's age just seemed to kind of fit perfectly for these two characters that I wanted to create. And then I immediately started Googling because I thought someone must have done this before me. There has to already be a book where two people are 100 years old. And so I did as many Google searches as I could. And I couldn't find anything. There probably is a book out there, so apologies if there is. And it felt like, it sounds quite cynical to say, but it felt like as soon as I had that idea of the two of them being 100, I thought, there's my elevator pitch. Like I'd read books that said, when you're pitching a book or when you're trying to get an agent, you need that elevator pitch. And it felt like I'd suddenly stumbled across one, and I was like, there's the pitch. This is a thing. I have to start writing this now.
Is the Glasgow Princess Royal Hospital a real place?
It's not. There is a Glasgow Princess hospital that's a maternity-only hospital, but as itself, it is a fictional hospital that I've created, mostly because I didn't want to get into any trouble for having, some slightly quirky characters inhabiting that hospital. I wouldn't want to claim that exists in the real world.
This book is such a great vehicle for quirky characters. How did you start thinking about the supporting cast?
I think that's one of the things that really took the longest. At first I had Lenny's voice, and then I very, very slowly brought Margot into the picture. And I think for me, I love weirdos. I love quirky people. Like, if you see someone on the bus who's just having a chat with every person that gets on, or, I used to work in a library, and there was a customer who used to take his trousers off when it was raining. Like, he'd come in from the rain, take his trousers off, put them on the heater to dry, and then he'd wear denim hot pants around the library as he worked. And just those kinds of people just fill my life with joy and just give you that kind of just a little spice of life, I think. So the supporting cast for Lenni and Margot really came out of the needs of Lenni and Margot. So Lenni needed someone who she could be vulnerable with, and she could talk about God and life and death. And so Father Arthur came out of that need. He's the hospital chaplain, and he's the place that Lenni goes to when she's really doubting herself. And then also New Nurse, who we never learn her real name, but she's Lenni's palliative care nurse, and she's quite new to the job, and she wants to do the best she can, but she's quite afraid, and she's really scared of losing Lenni. And so she came out of Lenni's need to have someone roughly her own age who could be her kind of confidant. And then in Margot's life, I just had the most fun, because we go back in time and we learn about Margot's early life and her years in London in the 60s. I had so much fun creating, love interests for Margot that offered her completely different things. So she has Humphrey, who she meets later on in life, and he's a stargazer, and he's quirky and unusual, but he offers her all this stability. Whereas in her younger years in London, she falls in love with Mina, and Mina is carefree, but she's really unreliable, and she's quite selfish. And so, but she brings Margot all this kind of excitement and all this kind of sort of drive to just be whoever she wants to be. And so I think for me, the supporting cast came out of what do Lenni and Margot need, and how can I bring people to give them what they need.
The book takes place mostly in the terminal ward of this hospital, and we realize that Lenni, she's 17, and she is she's not going to live much past that. This story could have a very dark and somber tone to it, yet it has the exact opposite. How did you kind of wrestle with these emotional extremes of, this is a dire sort of I'm at a lack for words here. The outlook is very somber and dire.
Yes.
Yet her response is not. When you're thinking about this character, how did you start realizing kind of how she would rise to the challenges that she was facing?
I'm so glad that you said that, because one of my big fears with the book was that it would be this big, dark, sad, depressing tale. And
Sure.
it's been,
And not that there aren't serious moments in the book,
mm.
and I don't mean to convey that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been such a joy to sort of to hear from reviewers and readers that they've been laughing at moments and that they found it an uplifting and ultimately kind of, a life affirming book. Because when you're writing, obviously it's just you writing, and I was sort of thinking, is this all getting a little bit too gothic and dark, and nobody's going to want to read this? So for me, I think one of the things that I find really interesting in sort of British culture is the idea of gallows humor, and the idea that as soon as things get serious, a lot of British people, we immediately try and make a joke out of things. This kind of absolute refusal to take ourselves too seriously. And I think one of the things that really helped me was I watched this documentary that was on Channel 4 in the UK, and it was called My Last Summer. And for the programme, they got several people who were terminally ill all together to spend a summer together in this house. And what amazed me was how much laughter there was, and how many jokes they had, and how incredibly alive these people were, even though they were facing this horrible thing. And so much of Lenny's positivity was inspired by those people in that documentary. And I think because she's 17, Lenny's just absolutely full of life. She hasn't given up, and she's cheeky, and she's irreverent, and she tries to push people's buttons, and she tries to get away with things, and sometimes she uses her illness to try and get away with things. And I think those are all the kinds of things that I would be doing if I was in her position at 17, just trying to get the most out of life that I possibly could. And for me, for the humour, there were no parts where I was writing where I thought specifically like, oh, this will make them laugh, or this is the funny part. It was mostly me trying to make myself laugh while I was writing. And so I always think I have a really weird sense of humour, so it's been really nice hearing that people have found bits funny as well.
Were there ever times in the writing that the relationship that Lenni and Margot developed, that did that relationship ever surprise you? Did you learn things about human nature and maybe about yourself in discovering these characters?
Yeah, I think the main thing that surprised me was how easy it was for them to trust each other. And I remember sort of going back during the editing stage and thinking, will the reader be frustrated that they've formed this immediate bond? Do they have enough time to trust each other? But it really felt like these two characters just kind of saw each other and kind of clicked. And I like to think of them as non-romantic soulmates. They were always meant to meet each other. They're kind of each other's other half, if you will. And so for me, like, it was just the idea that I could just relax a little bit and just let these characters kind of just be who they are, and they're already matched to sort of have this incredible relationship. And I think with Margot, I mentioned that Lenny popped into my head and just kind of was this really clear voice, but for Margot, it was a much longer, much slower process. And in the first draft, Margot was nothing like she is in the book now. She cried all the time, and she was a bit of a downer, and she was just this really kind of, she lost herself a lot to Lenny. Lenny's voice completely overpowered her. And I realized that I was kind of, in terms of like filling in Margot's backstory, I was really coming up against my own ageism, my own limited ideas of what this, in inverted commas, sweet old lady might have done in her life, and who she could be, and what things she could have done. And when I stopped thinking of Margot as like a sweet old lady and thought of her more as a 20-year-old, in London, I was able to sort of write someone so much more interesting. And as soon as I let go of all those ideas of like, well, I can't have a sweet old lady who is bisexual, I can't have a sweet old lady who's done these crimes, as soon as I let go of that, I had so much more fun, and Margot just suddenly felt so much more real to me.
I love that so much. The paintings, what a great story device that you came up with to explore, especially Margot's history, but Lenny's as well. And where did the idea for having these two characters to do a painting from each year, because what a great, there are lots of different ways that we've seen characters' backstories told throughout all the books and movies that we love, but this was a really unique idea. Where did this idea come from?
Oh, thank you. So I mentioned earlier that I'd seen this documentary. It was about a hospital art therapy class and like what it was doing for the patients. And this was honestly probably about 20 years ago, and it just stuck in the back of my head as like that would be such an interesting place, because in hospitals, you've got people who are there for a broken leg, and you've got people like Lenni and Margot who are living out the final days of their lives. And if you get an art room, you're basically putting them all in together, with this complete range of like emotion and sort of stakes and so on. So I knew that I wanted to do something in a hospital art room, and once I'd landed on the idea of them being 100 between them, it just kind of felt like this perfect thing that, how people write like Lenni was here on the wall, and Lenni has this kind of above her hospital bed there's a whiteboard where the nurses have written her name, and she knows that when she dies they're going to erase her name and write the name of the next patient. So Lenni has this thing in the back of her mind that she needs to leave her mark on the world. She needs to leave something that says Lenni was here. And so I think the paintings for me just felt like a perfect way for her to do something more permanent, and for her and Margot to create something sort of physical out of these mental memories, so that there'll be something left of them when they both pass away.
Father Arthur for me is one of the best characters of the book. Is he based on anyone that or was there anything that informed this character?
Oh, thank you. I love Father Arthur, and I always try and steer the conversation towards him because I love him so much. So Father Arthur is very, very loosely based on a really good friend of mine. And we met at university. And to give like a little bit of backstory, my parents are both atheists, but they sent me to Catholic school. So
as one does.
As you do. And like it was a really scary, very serious Catholic school. And I'm a naturally very obedient person. So I was at school trying to be the very best Catholic I could be. And then at home, my mum and dad would just be kind of making jokes about it and sort of being like, okay, so what's all this? What are you doing today? And so I came out of school with this hugely confused idea of who I am and what I believe and religion and everything, which is obviously a huge question. So I started at university, and I met my friend, and he was also from a very religious upbringing, but he was leaning more into the religion, and I was leaning more into like, maybe I'm agnostic, maybe I'm an atheist, I don't know. And we just had these conversations. I would pop into his, in a halls of residence, we had all these bedrooms along this corridor. I'd pop in for like a cup of tea and a biscuit, and we'd be in there for hours talking about everything. Like his type of Christianity was different from mine, and I'd never heard of the rapture, and he didn't believe in dinosaurs. And it sounds horrendous when you describe it, but it was the most fun, and we're still really good friends to this day. He has a signed copy of Lenni and Margot, and what I learned from that is that you can absolutely adore someone and have completely different worldviews. And so Arthur came out of this idea that you can fully love someone who's completely religious, even though you're not religious, and they can tolerate and understand and love you, even though you don't believe what they believe. And so lots of Arthur and Lenni's kind of, is there a God, or these theological debates really were gently inspired by my own conversations with my lovely friend. And then Arthur just grew out of there. As I said, I went to Catholic school. I would love to say that Arthur is based on some incredible priest, and I'm sure there are some out there, but he's not based on any priest. They were all scary when I was at school. And I just loved him so much, and I was worried that people would be like, oh, this doesn't sound true for a priest to be this nice, or what have you. But, it's been lovely seeing the response, and I just think him and Lenni have so much fun debating the existence of everything between them. So yeah, lots of fun for those two.
Well, and it's kind of a lost art, and I'm so glad that you brought that out in this character, because I think the internet has made it difficult for us to have relationships with people that we have some fundamental disagreements with. It used to be that we would sit down with our next door neighbor and have tea and disagree with them but still enjoy their company. Mm-hmm. And now we just want to shout at each other on the internet. It's weird.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just don't want to engage, you don't want to get involved, and there's trolls, and it all gets very scary and serious. And I think the internet sometimes makes it harder to have those conversations because you don't have tone of voice, you don't have gesture, you don't have those things that cue you into someone's kind of tone and whether they're meaning something as a joke or not. And so I think for me, it by no means makes me super special that I'm friends with someone who's religious while I'm not. But the way I like to think of it is we became friends by accident, almost in spite of everything going on around us, we became friends. And so that was the thing that I took into writing Arthur and Lenni. Like, it doesn't make sense for a 60-year-old priest to make friends with a 17-year-old girl. Like, that sounds like a disaster, but they can't help but become friends. They almost have no choice. They just completely make each other laugh and get each other and push each other's buttons. And so, yeah, I think it was one of my favorite things to write.
The 100 Years of Lenni and Margot is available everywhere now. When you're hearing this, there's going to be links to it in the show notes where you can grab it in Kindle edition or hardcover. I can't wait for the audiobook, Marianne. We're actually recording this a couple of weeks before the book comes out, and the audiobook won't be released, I'm presuming, until right at the end, as most audiobooks do. But have you heard any of the production yet?
I haven't yet, but I absolutely cannot wait. The British edition, they've used 2 actresses, so 1 actress for Lenni and 1 for Margot, and that's been incredible. So it just feels like such a kind of unexpected thing, like I always dreamed about getting published, but I never imagined there'd be an audiobook, which sounds ridiculous when you think about it, because there's audiobooks of so many books now. But I think there's something really special about hearing someone else read your words back to you, and it just kind of gives me the tingles, like thinking that I'm going to get that experience again. And I cannot wait to hear what they do with the audiobook.
Me too. I've read the art copy that I've got from your publisher, but I'm excited to hear the audiobook and to experience this book again. The 100 Years of Lenni and Margot, a must-have. You must grab this book. Use the links in the show notes, and go grab your copy today. Marianne, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, is there a place where they can connect with you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Instagram. I'm at It's Marianne Cronin. You'll get pictures of me with proofs, with copies, lots of pictures of my cat, who I recently adopted. And then on Twitter, I'm at It's M Cronin, because we couldn't fit my whole name in. And I absolutely love talking to readers. So, please do get in touch with me if you've got any questions or you want any more information.
Excellent. We'll link all that up as well. Marianne, this has been so much fun chatting. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Authors, if you're looking for a partner to help ensure that your book is the best it can possibly be, look no further than Pico's House. Crystal and her staff make a conscious effort to be critical yet courteous. They also strive to make the business side of things run smoothly so that you can rest easy knowing that your manuscript is in capable hands. Whether you need beta reading, developmental editing, a manuscript critique, line editing, copy editing, or proofreading, Pico's House is the one-stop shop for you. Check them out today at picoshouse.com to get started.